Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And now it's your turn to share your stories. I have another incredible surviving sibling here with me today. Yes, we have a guy on this season. We have Sidney Savoie on today. Sidney, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's really exciting to be here.
It's bittersweet is what I always say, right? It's
Yeah.
exciting to share your story and to connect with people, but I always say I wish we met under different circumstances, but it is an incredible community to be a part of because we all get it. Yeah, so today, Sidney, you're going to share your story with us. And of course, you're going to share about your sister, Dottie. Do you want to tell us a little bit about you and Dottie? You were quite close in age, too. So tell us a little bit about you guys growing up together, what your family dynamics were like. I'd love to start there.
Yeah, so she was about 2.5 years older than me, born in December 78. I was born in May of 81. And she's actually adopted. My parents got married in the early 70s and they wanted kids and it just wasn't happening. And so what they ended up doing was adopting my sister out of an agency in the Dallas area. And I've heard that this happens in a lot of other similar cases as well. As they adopted her and they were full-time school teachers starting another business on the side. So I think my mom's body was just stressed out. The body just couldn't handle a pregnancy. So they adopted her. That forced them to slow down and drastically alter their lives and how they lived it. They got pregnant, had a miscarriage. So I technically have two siblings that have passed. And then, of course, I was born in May of 81. I mentioned in the eulogy at my sister's funeral, I literally owe my life to her. Had my parents not adopted her, I feel confident saying that I would not be here. So it was me and my sister and my mom and my dad. My personality, while I have moments of like passion and excitement and energy, I'm pretty even keeled. I'm pretty laid back. You could describe me with words like steady, reliable, calm. My sister, complete opposite. She was like the bull in a china shop. She was like the crazy chihuahua. She just had so much energy and passion and drive. She could have talked to and made friends with a brick wall. She could have talked to anybody. She was incredibly talented as a dancer. She had so much potential. Of course, that because our personalities were so different, I think is why we bumped heads a lot growing up. Not necessarily in any terrible ways, really how you would just expect two siblings close in age to be. And then, of course, my parents, former school teachers, dad, former military. And then, of course, they started their family business, a trophy and award shop, and then eventually went into that full time. And yeah, just that's our little nuclear family there growing up.
Yeah. And when I started to learn about your story, I just thought it was so touching. And we're already starting deep here, but I thought it was so touching that you said about your sister Dottie that you owe like your life to her. Like, you're here. And I think it is a story that we do hear about couples, right? And they adopt and then, oh my gosh, here comes Sidney, right? It is common. It is something that I've learned over the years too. I hear these stories and it's really a beautiful thing. And I think it's really special just in the family dynamic too, right? To come together and the special like bond that you had with Dottie because of that. But I think you bring up a good point too. I had siblings very close in age too. And when you're close, like they're just things that are so amazing. Like they're your first friend, but they're also your first fight and sleepover, but enemy. And then you're stealing stuff from each other and hiding stuff from each other.
Making
So
signs on your door, do not come in my room, not allowed.
Yes. There's all those interesting phases that you go through. And I think as only siblings really understand that and understand those dynamics. And you can hate each other one day, but no one else better talk about them. And like all those really beautiful dynamics that happen. But you have quite an interesting one with Dottie being adopted. And then you were this amazing miracle that happened afterwards. So it's an interesting dynamic. And then also
I need you to call my parents and remind them that I'm an amazing miracle. Maybe a little fake there.
Shout out to your parents.
In terms of her being adopted, when I was younger, like my parents never hid it from us, so I always knew. And except for when we might get in fights and I might take some jabs at her or whatever, which I regret that I did that, but
Of course.
kids, we do dumb stuff.
Yeah.
But honestly, I never, when I think about it, I never saw her as anything other than just my sister. She wasn't my adopted sister, she was just my sister.
Yeah.
And as much as we clashed when we were younger, once we got to adulthood and both matured, I wouldn't say we ever had a bad relationship growing up, just sibling rivalry. But once we got to be adults, we had a good relationship. We may not have talked all the time. We may not have always been running in the same circles. We loved each other. I feel like we had a good relationship as adults.
And I think, again, I think a lot of us can connect with that as well. And when you get older, different things happen and your relationship can grow. And there's a lot of folks that come on the show or join different things that we do. And when you lose your sibling young, sometimes you don't experience that evolution. It's
Hmm.
something I'm happy about as well. And Sydney, it sounds like you feel the same way, that at least we did get that kind of time to maybe shift to an adult relationship. So that is, but it can make the loss very challenging too. So tell us a little bit about Dottie. Yes, she's bull in a china shop, extroverted. She sounds
Hmm.
like the life of the party, but I know she did struggle. She did struggle with drugs, addiction, some kind of dark things. Walk us through that. How did this happen for her? It's unfortunately not an uncommon story. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I even wonder too if she might have had undiagnosed ADD or ADHD. And the reason I say that is because anybody that meets Dottie could have seen that she was so passionate, so talented, had tons of potential, but it's like she just couldn't ever quite focus, is the best way to put it. Now, growing up, she was still the same person she was in adulthood as far as her personality. The difference is living at home with parents, they forced her to focus to the point where she got through school for the most part and was a very talented dancer, did dance classes for years and years. But I often wonder if maybe there was some ADD or ADHD there. My parents always said growing up that she struggled with depression and bipolar disorder. So there was a degree of mental illness. Again, she had gone to some counseling. I think at one point she had been prescribed medicine to take, but as a lot of people know, it's one thing to get prescribed it, it's another thing to take it faithfully enough to the point where it's effective, maybe the way that they're thinking it could or should be. I do know everybody's taken medicine of some sort that may not make them feel real good. I think that might have been part of it. But it's also like you take it, you think you're getting better, and then you stop, and then you're not really better. But yeah, the depression it is a little harder to notice sometimes because it could come across as, oh, that person is tired or whatever. There was one specific instance. I'd hear my parents saying that stuff growing up, depression, bipolar. I think because as much as I knew her and was in the home with her, they dealt with her in a totally different way that I can never understand because I was never her parent.
Right.
But then there was this one instance we were going to the Houston area to visit my older niece for her graduation. And my sister was riding with us, and my dad said something, I don't even remember what it was, that was apparently not to her liking. I thought she was asleep in the back seat. She bolts up like at lightning quick speed and then goes from what I thought was almost asleep to just in this furious rage of emotions, literally at the flip of a switch, is what it was like. And I was shocked. I could not believe that you could go from that low to that high in a split second. But at that moment, it really clicked for me and said, oh my gosh, she does struggle with bipolar. Like, bipolar really is a thing. It's not just a fancy word someone made up to describe someone who's being moody. Like, it's for real.
Yep.
So that was a watershed moment for me. I think it was the first time that I poignantly came face to face with some of the mental health struggles that I think she had. I think I don't know how to clinically state this, but I've heard people described as being addictive or having addictive personalities. I've met a few people like that over the course of my life. She was one of those. Again, she could instantly bond with people and things, and vice versa. People and things could instantly bond with her, which is good and bad. It's good in the sense that life is all about connection, but it's bad when you end up connecting with someone or something or vice versa, that's maybe not good for you. And if she was having the struggles with mental illness that she was having, then if she bonded with someone or something that's not good, it would have been harder for her to navigate that. So I think that's probably the addictive personality, is where her struggles with, whether it be drugs or alcohol or whatever behavior it might be, where a lot of that stems from. And then I think all of those things wrapped up into one also played off of the fact that she was adopted. Again, my parents never hid it from her. They never hid it from me. They didn't say, "Oh, that's my adopted daughter." I didn't say, "That's my adopted sister." She was my sister. She was their daughter. But I've read books on adoption, and I know that can also be a difficult wound to deal with. She did eventually get in touch with her birth mother. When you met her birth mother, you saw, and then you observed by behavior, that's where she came from,
Wow.
in both good and bad ways. And then after a few years, I think because they were so much alike is why they were button heads a lot. It's not that they ever got to a point where they hated each other, but it was just too tough. It was like
How
mixing
old was
oil and
she,
water.
Sydney? Yeah, how old was
Oh
she when she
gosh,
met her birth mother? Because that's a big moment,
she
right?
was
So,
probably somewheres in her 30s. I don't remember
oh,
exactly what year
wow.
it was. But yeah, it wasn't until her 30s. And the thing was, I don't know. I don't know how the verbiage with adoption works, if it was closed or not. But I think my sister initiated the search. Which, once all that happened and we met her birth mother, I never really had any problems with that. My parents didn't either. Didn't feel like that made me not her brother, or my parents not her parents. It just added an extra layer to the family.
Yeah.
And I think when it was good with her and her birth mother, I think there was a healing aspect of that to her. But again, it didn't last forever. And I don't know that the fact that it eventually they parted ways was necessarily the one thing, or even a thing that sort of moved her towards her eventual passing. But I'm sure it probably hurt. I'm sure you go all those years not knowing your birth mother, you reconnect, it seems good, we're so much alike, and then it eventually peters off. I'm sure that was tough. I can't imagine what it's like, and I'll never know, but
Yeah.
I know it wasn't easy.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor.
If you've lost a sibling, trust me, I know exactly how you feel. I'm Maya. I'm the host of the Surviving Siblings podcast, but I'm also the founder of Surviving Siblings Support. I know that going through this experience is extremely difficult, whether you've lost a brother like me, a sister, or perhaps more than one sibling. Trust me, we know exactly how you feel. So that's why I started our Patreon account. You can click below to find out more about our Patreon. If you join our Patreon group, it'll give you just a little bit of extra support that you need along your journey as a bereaved sibling, or as we like to call it, a surviving sibling. We offer monthly support groups. We offer a free copy of our grief guide that is actually found on Amazon. It's called the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. We also offer direct messaging to our community and to me for extra support. And we have incredible events. We have workshops throughout the year that you'll get access to, and you'll also have access to our summit that happens annually. And so much more, as you'll connect with a community of surviving siblings that understand the journey of losing a sibling. You can click below to join us today and also check out some additional VIP features that we offer. I hope to see you in the group, and until then, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings. I agree with you completely. I think that must be so challenging, and I think that your family is just awesome. I'm personally, my belief, and just talking to so many people who have been adopted or had siblings and just being so open like that, I think it's super healthy. But I can definitely see from Dottie's perspective, like her having empathy for that, because being in your 30s, meeting your birth mother, having those connections, but maybe also seeing some things where you're like, hang on a second. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
layers there in that kind of interaction, and just opening up that part of your life too, because this is your family, you and your parents. are her family, right? But then
Mhm.
you have this other box to open and explore, and it can, like you said, it can have some beautiful things there, and then you may have some things you have to examine, and that can be challenging, for sure.
Yeah, and it's funny because, again, it's almost like she had 2 moms. It's not like she ended up with a birth mother and an adoptive mother. They were just both mom,
Yeah.
right? But I think my sister also realized that even though my parents were her adoptive parents, I'm not sure how else to say it, but my sister knew where her bread was buttered in terms of these were the parents. Now, all credit to her birth mother. I have so much respect for in that situation, you want to have the baby, but you can't take care of it. So here's a way that you can make sure that your child is provided for.
Yeah, I
And then
agree.
my parents were the ones that really they did the work. They raised her. They dealt with all her difficulties. They were there day in and day out. But going back to her birth mother, when we met her, we could see exactly why she was the way she was. And then, funny enough, my sister had 3 children. She kept my oldest niece and youngest niece, but when my middle niece was born, she ended up giving her up for adoption because she was just at a spot where it was just the better decision. We met that niece a couple of times in the first 2 years or so, but it's get changed from an open to a closed situation. It's not our thing to push any sort of relationship.
Yeah.
But from what I heard over the years, that middle niece ended up being my sister's carbon copy, who was her birth mother's carbon copy. I think maybe the difference was that my niece's adoptive family maybe had a little bit more success in addressing the issues, seeking treatment, and trying to get her to a point where it's not that it made the difficult situation go away, but that my niece could maybe have the tools to deal with it a little bit better.
Very well said, and I think a lot of people can connect with that, Sydney, and I think it's also just the time too. Like, we're
Mhm.
just more aware, especially coming out of COVID. We're just more cognizant of the fact that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay. We could
Mhm.
do a whole episode on that because it's also the times when just talking to folks like you on the show, when we think back, what could we have done differently with our sibling or this? It's also time and evolution and understanding mental health more and understanding addiction more or understanding certain things that we talk about on the show and how we lose our siblings. And I just want to tell you as well that I really connect with what you're saying about your sister Dottie because my brother was bipolar as well, and like he was
Mhm.
never formally diagnosed, and it was always something I was quite angry at my parents about because my sister, I have two sisters, one is a year younger than me, but her and I always used to be like, Mom, Dad, look at this behavior. And I so
Mhm.
connect with the car moment that you were talking about because I feel like whether you have a sibling who's struggling with mental health or addiction, or there's always a moment, and we talk about it on almost every single episode, there's always a moment where people are like, I remember this specific moment where this person
Mhm.
did this, whether it's your brother or sister, whomever we're talking about on, right? In this case, it's your sister. And you remember, and it's an awakening moment, like you said, where you're
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
oh, they're struggling with this because I remember having those with my brother because he would go, you described it so well. He would go from 0 to like off the Richter scale. And I'm like, whoa, how
Mhm.
does somebody do that?
Yeah, how does that happen? Where did that come from?
Because I connect more with you, Sydney. I'm a little more of a steady Eddie type of person. I'm pretty even keeled.
Mhm.
So watching that in those moments, and then also when my brother would use drugs or alcohol, it would get aggravated even more and it would
Right.
become even more escalated, which I'm sure happened in your situation too. But those were the opening moments for me where I was like, we are not the same. Like, I really, and when he was good, he was great. But when he was struggling and something set him off or something, like,
Mhm.
it's like walking on eggshells sometimes and you just love them and you don't want to see them go there, but you have no control over that. And it is very real. You
Yeah,
described it
and
well.
I think it's worth noting too that people that have struggles, whether it's mental health or whatever else, life is hard enough to figure out and deal with as it is. But I think when they're predisposed to those kind of problems, and then you add even just a little bit of alcohol or whatever substance, it just makes it that much harder.
Absolutely. I watched it myself. So again, connect with your story. And as you're sharing that moment and we're talking about this, hard not to flash back to those moments where I was like, oh my gosh. But you make a great point too. Life is not easy. It's a ride and we go through a lot. But when you're struggling with mental health or other things, it's just that much harder. And I just have a deep empathy for folks like us who have a loved one that go through life like that. It's tough. It's really tough.
Just share real quick also, my parents for so many years beat themselves up with why isn't she getting better? Why is this so hard? And I think even if you're not the parent, if you're the sibling or whatever your relationship is to the person that is having a tough time, it's easy to do that. Like, why is it so hard? Why isn't this working? Why can't she just get better? And sometimes you'll never have that answer. You'll never have a definitive reason of why things are the way they are. My parents also, a very wise priest told them when they were in a particular like difficult period with my sister when she was younger. It's cliche, but it's so true. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I think if we realize that if we do what we can, we set a good example, we try to provide all the resources that we can for the person who's having a tough time, then we can have some peace and rest with that. And whether or not they choose to avail themselves of what help we might be trying to give or whatever it is, that's ultimately their decision. We can't force them to make that decision. And if they don't make that decision, we might not ever know why. Who knows? So I guess the moral of the story is do what you can, but don't be too tough on yourself when you're dealing with a sibling or whoever that's having a tough time.
That is so much easier said than done, though, Sydney.
Yeah.
So much
Yeah.
easier
I
said than
still
done.
haven't figured it out.
But you're on the journey. And no, it's such a simple saying, right? But
Hmm.
it's true. And I personally have said it many times too. But I feel for your parents. I feel for you because you do along the journey. You're like, what could I have done? What are we not doing? But there is a simplicity to it where that phrase just is perfect. And that quote is perfect because they have to want it, right? You have to want it. And you can only do so much. Like they're their own individual person. And that was difficult for me on my journey. I know that's difficult for a lot of our listeners, a lot of you guys listening. I hear this all the time, right? What if I did this or what if I did that? And you said it so perfectly, Sydney. You have to get to a point, and it doesn't have to be the day after you lose them or even a month or a week or a year, but you do have to get to a point where you release that because you have to know that you've done everything that you can. And even if there's that bargaining part that people do where they're like, what if I had just kept her in my house and helped her
Hmm.
with this? Or what if I had kept my brother here? Right. And like that kind of, but we didn't, and we still loved them and we still wanted the best for them and we were still there for them. And so it's okay. There does come a point where you have to release it. And I do feel like sometimes we're in a prison of emotion with that kind of stuff. And that can be really challenging. But you said it perfectly. We can lead them, but we can't force them to drink the water. I love it. It's
And
true.
I think it's important too to make the distinction. You hear a lot about hindsight being 2020, and it absolutely is. But I think hindsight is destructive when we're looking in our hindsight, but then we're staying in the past and, like you said, bargaining where, oh, if I would have just been more available to my sister, then XYZ would have happened instead. But hindsight can be valuable. And it took me a while to get there, but when I would use my hindsight to look at what happened, to not live and try to change the past, but to try to be better and help people more going forward. Nothing is going to bring my sister back. I cannot go back and change what happened, whether it's my actions or hers. But what I can do is learn from her story, learn from what happened to her, and whether it's through like somebody like you starts a podcast like this to help other siblings, or whether if I just know that somebody lost a sibling or has a sibling that's going through a rough time, or even when our sons are having a difficult time, I can take what I learned in the past with my sister or whoever else, whatever the experience is, and apply that to the future. So I think the key is, are you allowing hindsight to be something that keeps you trapped in the past, or are you using it productively to help you like move forward?
I love this. I agree with you completely. And I think it's a big mindset shift. It's a big emotional shift that happens along your grieving journey because it is normal. It is normal to be
Hmm.
like hindsight's 2020 and then get, like you said, get stuck there and think back and be like, if only I did this, like we just mentioned. But I think it's a great way to rephrase it and think, okay, yes, it's okay to reflect back. Okay, if I had known that then, hindsight is 2020. But the difference is you can't get stuck there. Like you said, getting stuck there is what causes a lot of our emotional distress and depression. And I think I've had a lot of people on the show who have told me I've gotten stuck there. I've gotten stuck there. So this is very applicable. And I know all of you listening have experienced this at some point too, because I did. I got very stuck too in what happened and the whole process. And I think sometimes too, Sydney, that we think if we go back there and stay there too, it
Mhm.
can become, it's uncomfortable, but it is also comfortable because it makes us feel like our siblings still there and they're not. So it's about moving forward and bringing those lessons with us. I think you said that very well. So tell us a little bit about Dottie as an adult and kind of lead us up to, unfortunately, her passing. But tell us what was going on with her. She was 41 when she passed.
Mhm.
But tell us a little bit about her life. She has children. So she had, again, still a very vibrant life, it sounds. But tell
Yeah,
us a little bit about that.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
she got married very young at the age of 18 when she was expecting my oldest niece. And I think her and her ex-husband, they were young, they had the right desire. We're just trying to do the right thing. We know now that maybe doing that just because you were expecting a child was maybe not the best thing to do. But anyway, so she got married young while she was expecting my oldest niece who is now, gosh, 7, I think.
Wow.
And it might have lasted 2 or 3 years. They ended up getting divorced. Really wasn't messy or anything like that. Divorce is never fun, but overall it wasn't too bad. And then, so that was in 97, my oldest niece was born. I want to say about 2 or 3 years later, she got pregnant for and then had my middle niece, the one she gave up for adoption. 97. Yeah, so the middle niece was born, I think, in 99, and then my youngest niece was born in 2001. So they were spaced about 2 years apart. She, you know, kept my oldest and youngest niece, and middle one gave up for adoption. And the father of my younger niece, or my youngest niece, she ended up marrying him, and they had a little bit longer lasting marriage. Again, I think, my sister just having some of the difficulties that she had. And even when you don't have any glaring faults or difficulties, everybody has their struggles. So I think all of that kind of mixed together is why the second marriage didn't work out either. And it really seemed like once that happened is when I felt like as an adult that the sort of instability became a little more noticeable, because even if a marriage is not supposed to work out, it's still hard to go through it. So I'm sure the first time it was hard for her. The second time, I don't can't imagine it got any easier. And then because of that instability, my nieces ended up moving a few different times from when she split with the youngest one's dad. And I think they might have even moved around while they were still together too, but just a lot of that upheaval combined with all the other factors that made my sister who she was. I think looking back on it, I think was maybe the beginning of the end, but like about 10 years before the end happened. Because really, after that, until she passed, I don't know that there was ever a period where I felt like, okay, she's in a really good spot. Like, we're so happy that she's in this spot. She's overcome so much. It's not that there were like a lot of moments where, oh my God, she's in danger. This is terrible. But just again, this consistent inconsistency was really what marked her life from that point up until her passing. I thought about it. I really feel like I noticed the last year of her life up until right before she passed, or when she passed. I felt like for that last year, okay, finally, it seems like she's getting a little more stable. It's not that she was having any great monetary or career success, but she had been with her boyfriend slash fiance, whatever they were, for quite some time, and things just seemed calm. When you have someone in your life who is a very volatile person, a very passionate person, sometimes the measure of success is just, are things calm?
Oh my God, I so
And
relate to this, Sydney.
and
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what it was for about a year before she passed. It seemed like overall things were calm. I dared to start thinking, is she finally at the age of 40, 41, starting to turn a corner? And then she ended up passing away in August of 2020.
It is interesting because I can relate to it, and it's a different measure. Like you said, it's when you have someone in your life that has, for me at least, and I think you can connect with this, it seems like constant turmoil or constant things
Mhm.
happening. And like how I measure success for some of my other family members or friends, it feels like they're like, oh, I just got that dream job that I wanted, or oh my God,
Mhm.
I got engaged, or we're having a baby, or just like things like that would seem like, oh gosh, I'm excited for them. They're getting the things that they want. And with someone like my brother, and sounds like Dottie was like this as well.
Mhm.
It was for him, it was like, okay, we're good. We're going to a job. We've got a calm relationship. We're happy. We
Yeah.
can come to like a family get together and there's no like
No
drama. That
fireworks, no drama.
I get it. Yeah. And
Well,
then
you
yeah,
mentioned earlier too about walking on eggshells. She was definitely the type that when things were rough for her, you felt like you had to walk on eggshells. So to me, again, success or a good period would have consisted of you didn't feel like you had to walk on eggshells and you had some consistency and you kind of predictability is another word I'd use. I don't want life to be boring, but for me, I have to have some consistency and a little bit of predictability, some sort of rhythm. And so that's what her last year was. It was much less, if any, of walking on eggshells. She was more consistent and life was a little more predictable in a good way.
I get, and yeah, very well said. I connect with that too. And I think again, there's all different personality types, but this particular personality type that seems to be both Dottie
Hmm.
and my brother Andreas, that yeah, that's something. It was refreshing, and I could feel like anxiety like leaving my body, and I would feel really happy after having that kind of engagement or visit or moment with him. And I'm sure you felt the same way with Dottie. Like,
Absolutely.
just felt good.
Yeah.
So, what happened in August of 2020? Walk us through what happened, Sydney.
So she passed away from a drug overdose, and it was some pretty heavy stuff. After the autopsy, they found heroin, meth, and fentanyl in her system. One of those by themselves is deadly enough. You combine all three, she didn't stand a chance. We don't know the exact circumstances of what happened because what little investigation happened didn't really go anywhere. I used to get hung up on that, like, oh, these inept police and somebody's pulling strings or doing this or that malicious thing behind the scenes. But then eventually I realized even the most successful investigation that figures out exactly what happened won't bring her back. So, and an ex of mine from a few years back had a similar situation of an older sibling who had passed from an overdose. Similar thing. Investigation didn't really lead anywhere. And she reminded me, like, I eventually just had to let it go. Nothing is going to bring that person back. But so we don't know all the details of her passing. We know that she was with her fiance they were staying in like a mother-in-law suite at his grandma's house because they were helping to look after her, take care of her a little bit. And as best as I can remember, they did the drugs at some point in the afternoon or evening. She went to sleep, woke up, was apparently getting really sick, upset stomach type stuff. And then I guess at some point shortly after that, she passed. I didn't really get into the weeds or ever find out, was it some sort of heart attack or did she like aspirate or whatever? But drugs the afternoon or evening or day before, getting really having like a violent reaction to it and then passing away. And going back to how I said she had about a year of what seemed like a good period. Then talking to my niece, my oldest niece, after she passed, she was like, Mom was not suicidal. And I truly don't believe it was that. I don't think it was any sort of like giving up hope sort of thing.
Right.
I think what it is, anybody who has suffered with any sort of addiction knows that even when you quote unquote beat it, people that have been sober and going to Alcoholics Anonymous for 37 years will tell you it still could potentially happen if you put yourself in the wrong kind of situation with the wrong people. you stay sober forever and it could still happen again. So I think what it was is she had been good for about a year, and I think she just made a mistake and slipped up. I don't think it was any sort of intentional bad thing she was wanting to do. I think she just maybe crossed paths with the wrong people, had a weak moment, not really sure. And I suspect, because it's not like that was the first time she had ever done drugs, was the night she passed. She had struggled with it previously. My theory is that with the stuff that she had in her system, it was a relapse of sorts, and she probably thought, oh, I can do this much of these things to achieve whatever I'm looking to achieve with this. Probably not realizing that your tolerance, the longer you're away from something, goes down. That's my theory. I don't know if it's true. God willing, if I get to the pearly gates after I'm done hugging my sister, I can be like, hey, what happened? So I don't know, but I suspect it was a relapse that she just didn't realize she had lost some tolerance, and that's how it
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah, that was going to be my question for you. Did you know if she was actively using? But it just sounds, based on you piecing together information with your niece and kind of you putting on your logical hat like I do too. So
Mhm.
again, connect with this part of the story too. Okay, if this happened and this happened. And I just feel like so much of us, especially siblings that listen to this show, like you guys that do and come on the show, I feel like it's our personality types that want to know, which is why we listen and we connect with
Mhm.
each other. But yeah, I think it's a difficult thing because we'll never know. That's such a hard part of the story.
Yeah, you'll never know, but it's just you always still want to find out, because I
Right.
think finding out as much as you can is maybe part of the grief journey.
Yeah,
But
I agree. I agree. I think it is too, and I think it depends on your personality too. Sydney, I think some of
mhm,
us want to know a lot. We want to know as much as possible. And some of us need to know just this part, and then we can, and that's okay too. We're able to move forward. But I think what's important is understanding yourself on the grief journey and understanding what you need and give yourself what you need. And also, this is big learning for me, respecting what other people do want to know and do not want to know, because that's another layer that
right.
comes into this, right?
Yeah, I'm with my personality, and you mentioned you had a similar one, and people like us. I need to know to a certain degree, but I've always been one of those people. I don't know if you want to use the word faith or trust or whatever. I don't have to know all the details of something. If I know something's true, or if I believe something, or I've found out just enough of what I need to know, I'm pretty much fine with that. I don't necessarily have to just go into this utmost detail and try to figure it all out. Once I know enough, I'm happy with that.
Yeah. And I think you're describing something that's really just, again, such a big point for a lot of people, especially early in your grief journey. A lot of you guys listening are early in your grief journey. And I get asked a lot, Sydney, should I get the autopsy report? Should I do this? Should I do that? And I always, that's not a question I typically give an answer to. I question back and I go, what do you feel like you need? What do you
Mhm.
need to know? And I also tell people to think about, once you get that, what are you hoping to achieve? What are you wanting to get out of that? And I think that is a good deciding factor of whether or not you need to figure that out. But I'm like you, once I got enough answers for my brother, I was like, I have faith that I know what happened and this happened. And you also brought up a really big point. You said that your ex went through something like this too. And it's, you do have to release this at some point. And it is a hard process because you want to get justice and you want to find everything out. But it's that point, it's another pivotal moment in this journey where you're like, we're never going to know 100%. I've got to release this because, and that's another toughie for a lot of people too, right? Oh,
Mhm.
I want to figure all this out. I want to hold on to it. But there is, I guess, a peace or kind of a calming release when you can say, you know what, I can let this go now, because there's only so much that you can do. And this happens a lot with when folks come on like yourself with overdose, drugs, homicide, suicide. There's a lot of unanswered questions that are always there. And it is a part of the grieving process to release at some point, because whether that takes you a year, 2 years, 10 years, 15 years, it is a
Mhm.
moment where it happens. And I think it's a pretty pivotal moment. It was for me, at least. And it sounds
Yeah,
like it was for you too, when you were
absolutely.
able to just let it go. I think when you're early in the grieving process, people are like, I don't want to let this go. It's us, like I mentioned earlier, keeping our sibling. with us. I would love to dive into something we chatted about offline, Sydney.
Hmm.
So, this is something I had never thought about, but I think I felt it. You were telling me a little bit about what it's like to lose a sibling and what that kind of meant for you. And do you want to share that kind of quote that you
Yeah,
shared with me? Because I
absolutely.
feel powerful in your story.
Everybody will eventually lose all of their loved ones, whether they go before you or you go before them. And those are so many different types of relationships: parents, siblings, friends, loved ones, whatever. And they each have their own special grief that goes along with it. The more and more I listened to your show, it was such a refreshing thing because you're with this community of people that knows what you're going through. But then I really started to think, what is it about specifically sibling loss that is as tough as it is? What makes it unique and maybe different than when you lose a parent, a grandparent, a friend, whatever? And what I'm gonna pull up my notes here so I don't misquote myself. I realized that my sister's death is the closest I'll get to my own death without experiencing my own death, because she's my sister. We're on the same level, same generation, same parents. It especially because we were so close in age. That's really the closest I'll come to death before my own. And that was like, "Ooh, wow, that's a pretty sobering thought." When you have a 150-year-old great grandma that passes away, you barely know who she is. That person, not that they're not important to you, but they don't really mean as much to you in terms of how you related to them. But the closer to your inner circle and your nuclear family, and then when you get to your sibling who is the same the same level as you, it really hits you like, wow, that in an alternate universe that could have been me instead of her. Or it's also a sibling loss is particularly sobering because it just for me, it reminds me that this particular phase of our existence, whether you're a Christian or not, however you want to look at it, it's not permanent. This phase is going to end at some point. For those of us that are lucky, if you want to call it that, it might last 100 something years. For those of us, it might not. But it's going to end at some point. And you can tend to forget that because you're just so wrapped up in just living life, which is good. You don't want to think every day, oh, I'm going to die one day. You want to live your life, but at the same time, you still have to realize it's going to happen eventually. And I think that's what it was for me. It was just it was probably the most powerful reminder I've experienced of our mortality, that we're not going to be here forever.
Yeah. I think, again, when we chatted about this before, I was just so excited to share this, just so much of your story. But that quote, I was like, oh my gosh, we have to talk about that, Sydney, because when you said it to me for the first time, and even when you said it this time and expanded on it, I just think, wow, because I think I did feel all of that myself too, Sydney. Like I really connect with that. And what I think is so interesting, there's so many different layers about your story. You and your sister, I'm a very spiritual person. So you
Hmm.
and your sister are adopted, and she's adopted. You're obviously
Hmm.
biological, but I just think it doesn't matter. I think when we're spiritually meant to be a family, we're a family, and
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents on that kind of stuff. And so the fact that you had this reaction to that and felt that, I was like, absolutely. I so connect with what you said because it is very it's a very sobering experience,
Hmm.
exactly. And it also, my brother and I are only 3 years apart to the day. We have the same birthday. And so it really hit me hard, and I remember just being in the throes of it, being like, God, especially like year 2, 3, when I was like really struggling because the case was still going on and all this. And I was like, why is this hitting me so hard? Why? Why is this so hard? Like all those whys, like, oh, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? But this, which you just said, Sydney, and like how you explained it, I think is going to be so helpful for everyone listening, because I think it helps us understand why this
Hmm.
is so hard, because it is the closest thing to like yourself dying. It's a moment of a check-in. My God, we're like near the same age, and even if you
Hmm.
do have a little bit of an age gap with your sibling, it does not matter. You guys have experienced a life together, right? And there
Right.
are similar things that no one else is going to really understand other than your sibling. And so it's oh my gosh. So I loved that. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think that's a huge thing to think about, because I think we've all felt it, but maybe not had a way to put it in words. Yeah, it's a big one. I also want to talk about, because I connect with this too. I want to talk about the fact, congratulations, you are still a newlywed, as I would call you.
Yeah, it still feels pretty new. It's been about
Yeah.
almost a year and a half.
Yeah, that's exciting. But also an interesting dynamic for you as well, because your wife never met your sister, Dottie. Is that right?
Right.
So, how do you guys tell us about that? Tell us how you feel about that, how you navigate that, because it's something that comes up all the time. Siblings will say, "Hey, I'm so excited I got engaged," or "Hey, I'm so excited I know I've met the one, I've met my soulmate,
Mm.
but I feel like I can't. I see this every day, Sydney, but I feel like I can't be happy, or I feel like I can't do the wedding, or I feel because my brother's not here or my sister's not here."
Mhm.
And I'm sure you connect with that, with Dottie not meeting your wife. So tell us about that experience and how that's been for you.
I think we talked earlier about how once me and my sister got more into adulthood, our relationship matured and we became a little bit more like friends and related to each other better. And part of that was I've always been a hopeless romantic. I think probably since the moment I was born, I knew I wanted to get married and have a family. That's just what I always desired most. And I won't say unfortunately, because I think the timing was what it was supposed to be. But when it doesn't happen until later in life, it can be a little difficult. It's really difficult to wait when you're so ready for something, or at least you think you are, and you're so passionate about it. And she was always like one of my biggest cheerleaders. She was always on my side. And not that she ever really tried to set me up with anybody, but she was just always asking about that kind of stuff and hoping for the best, and just always wanting me to be happy. While it's sad that this side of heaven, my sister and my wife will never be able to meet, it was still really special to know that my sister was in my corner. But yeah, the tough side of it is mourning those relationships that either ended or that will never get to happen. My wife is in some ways very different than my sister, but they're both like very passionate people, very fiery personalities. I really feel that they would have just loved getting to meet each other and hang out with each other. So I think that of all of the losses related to my sister's passing, that's probably one of the bigger ones. And then the other one kind of related to that is that when you get married, you dream about growing old with that person. I think it's the same with siblings. And so, in a similar vein, I won't get to grow old with my sister. And that's hard too, because she didn't get to come to my wedding because she had passed. She won't get to see all these other milestones that'll happen. One day when my parents pass, as a sibling, like there's going to be other family and people there, but I will be the sole kind of person remaining from my parents to have to deal with that, and to not have her there when it happens one day is obviously going to be difficult. Mourning those lost relationships and those people not being there for the milestones.
Yeah. We often call them secondary losses. And
Mhm.
I didn't have a clue what that was 7.5, 8 years ago, right? Now I'm very well aware of what those secondary losses are. And weddings, kids, other deaths, transitions, things happening in your life, new jobs, different adventures. These are all things that we don't think about until we lose our brother or our sister. And then we're like, wow. And that's a big one that comes up too, Sydney, is when it's two of you, right? And you're
Mhm.
the surviving sibling. There's
Right.
no S on the end, the surviving sibling. So that's right. You're your point of contact for parents for rest of their time, and that's a whole other conversation too, because you thought you had Dottie to go through that with
Mhm.
and to go through that experience, and your parents getting older and you guys helping them, and but it's on you. And so those are a lot of these like heavy secondary losses that can happen. And so it's not just the happy milestones, it can also be the difficult milestones too. And those are your siblings are your people, and then they're not there to experience that with you. And I've had a lot of people share sometimes that they go through so many different emotions about it. Like sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're angry. They're like, "You're not going to be here to help me with the parents anymore."
Mhm.
There's so many different emotions. Do you experience all of that too, Sydney? Do you go through those types of emotions, or where are you today with that?
I feel like specifically with that, like just taking the example of my parents, one day they'll pass away and I'll have to deal with all of that. It I'm not so much frustrated that she won't be there for that, because I know that kind of with her personality and some of the difficulties that she had, I don't know if that kind of thing would have been her forte, or that she would have been able to be real present for that kind of thing. But yeah, other than that, the frustration of her not being there just in our lives on a daily basis or for the milestones was tough.
It's very tough. Yeah. Sydney, tell us a little bit about how is your relationship now with your nieces since the passing of Dottie? Has that been, gosh, such different dynamic backgrounds, right?
Mhm.
One was adopted, and so how have you maintained a relationship? How has that been? Because that's another layer that happens
Yeah.
too when your sibling passes and then they have children.
Yes, it's tough that my sister's gone, but obviously you live on through your descendants. And so it's like she's gone, but in a way she's not. The middle niece, and the one that my sister gave for adoption, gosh, it's she's 25 by now. I haven't seen her or heard anything of her since she was like 2. So there's not really any relationship there. I would say I have a good relationship with my oldest and my youngest niece. The youngest one lives, I think, in the Houston area. I'm not the world's best uncle. I don't know all the details, but she's like Houston, Dallas area, somewhere's around there. She's doing really good for herself. She's in a really good relationship. The guy's got his head on straight and has a looks like a good career ahead of him. We don't talk that often, but that's life. I don't hardly ever talk with my uncles, and it's not out of anything bad. It's just you grow up and the unit breaks down into different subunits, and then that becomes a unit. But good relationship. And then my oldest niece actually lives 2 doors down from my parents. They were able to secure a house for her and her boyfriend and their 3 kids and get them in a good living situation. And so they're 2 doors down. So even though she was still living in town, when you're in a different part of town, it's almost like you don't live in the same town. So
Right.
her being so close to my parents, and the fact that I see my parents usually every week, I keep in pretty good contact with them. It's easy to go see my parents and then literally cross the neighbor's yard and then be at my niece's house. I would say we have a good relationship. I think it really hit me and my nieces, me in terms of continuing a relationship with my sister, and for my nieces in terms of also continuing that relationship with her, but from the opposite direction. We realized that we only have each other now, because my parents are in their late 70s. God willing, they have a lot of years left. They'll be gone before us, likely. And so then after that, it's just going to be me and my 2 nieces. That'll really be all that's left of that nuclear family. And I think we've all realized that on some level, which is why, even though we may not talk a lot or hang out a lot, we try to maintain a good relationship. We try to touch base. And with my oldest niece being in town, I try to every so often, me and my wife and the kids, or even if it's just me and my wife, or whatever combination, we try to foster that relationship. Because we've all experienced with our sibling loss that hindsight and overanalyzing the past, and what if I could have done this, and we realize we're through that trying to live and stay in the past as if we can bring our sibling back or stay in the past with them. But I think one of the healthy ways of keeping your sibling alive is through some of those secondary relationships. If they had kids, or I'm sure your brother had some friends and some people in the community that y'all knew, and then you peripherally maintain some sort of connection there, and that sort of helps keep their memory alive.
Yeah, I agree. It's becoming a little bit of a theme this season, actually, talking about
Yeah.
that specific topic, because I think, yeah, I think it is healing. I wish someone would have told me that earlier, Sydney, right? Those
Mhm.
kind of relationships that touched your sibling, because my brother did not have kids, but he had an amazing girlfriend, and that was very healing to stay close to her for a while. And she's just a great person. And it's a big thing for me and my youngest sister to talk about the memories of my brother, and that's again just like cherishing all of that like you do with your nieces. And yeah, it's a moment too to be like, oh my God, like our parents are getting older. Like they're not going to be here. Like, I mean, in
Hmm.
a morbid way to think about it, yes, we do hope that they go first and the order happens that way, right? Because that's how it was supposed to happen. And it
Yeah.
didn't for us, right? With our sibling. You do start to think about those relationships and the memories. So I get it. And I'm so glad that you have relationships with them because it's a piece of your sister that lives on. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and another way I look at it too is like they're my nieces, but now that my sister's gone, I almost feel like they're like my daughters in a way.
Yeah.
It's their mom is gone, and I'm the closest thing to their mom, so I don't know. It's a neat little dynamic. I'm blessed by it. I enjoy it. I'm glad we have that.
Yeah. I definitely think it's a positive thing.
Mhm.
So, one thing I want to ask you before we come to a close, Sydney, I ask every guy that comes on the show this. What perspective do you have about going through this as a man, as a guy? Because it's interesting, and I've shared this very vocally with everyone. I've shared this with you every season. We have a lot of people who want to come on the show, and I'd love to share every single story. And hopefully, one day I will get there where we're telling
Mhm.
as many stories as possible. But we don't have a lot of men wanting to come onto the show and share. And it's been very eye opening for me, Sydney, sharing these stories and putting my story out there. And I think it's interesting. I do think there's something to that. I do think men grieve differently, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Like, why do you think that is? What's been different for you on this journey? And have you experienced that as a man? Has it been different for you? And do you find yourself around more women that are open about their grief? Like, what has this been like for you? I'd love to hear your
Um,
perspective on this. Yeah.
I'll corroborate what you said, and that every single episode I've listened to, none of them have been men. I'm sure I'll come
Yep.
across one eventually.
Hmm.
But, and to also reference, we talked about people with personalities like yours and mine, where we're a little bit more laid back. I think just because my personality was like that, I tended to maybe not be as likely to be as vocal or as proactive in my grief. And then, of course, guys, it just seems like guys in general, whether it's intentional or not, we generally speaking don't process and talk about and deal with emotions. I feel like I'm a little bit of an outlier in spite of my personality, maybe because of it. It's the grief journey was something that I was never afraid to go on. When my sister passed, one of the first things, two big things that I did. Well, first of all, what I noticed about my sister passing, and this was really the first time I had ever experienced it in life, is it really helped me to really truly experience emotions and to really plumb the depths of emotion that exist in our hearts and in our minds. I wish that I would have had a positive experience in life that would have really caused me to truly experience the depth of my emotions and explore them all. But looking for some positives from my sister's legacy and from her passing, it absolutely got me in touch with my emotions. So I don't know that I would have been able to really be as emotional as I feel like I am now versus before had she not passed. Now, if I could bring her back and then just not be as in touch with my emotions as I was before she passed, I would
Right.
absolutely do that. But
If I could just have both, it'd be great. But it's about finding these like gifts in the pain, right? Absolutely. I get what you're
so that,
saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
she, when she passed, it really, that was the beginning of experiencing emotion and going on the grief journey. The two main ways that I feel like I constructively dealt with my grief during the first year is one of our local hospices has a really good, and it's all free, grief support groups. I did 2 6-week rounds of that. And again, I don't know if any of them were sibling losses or not, but just again, knowing that the people in the room that I was sharing space with had also lost a loved one. And that I could see, oh my God, look, it's heartbreaking for them as well. Whether it's they said something that helped me or just sharing that space with them and knowing that nothing else but, okay, I might not identify with your story, but in my heart, I know what you're going through. So even if that's the only comfort I can offer you, then we can offer that to each other. So I felt like I was proactive with tangible grief support measures, groups, or going to a labyrinth walk or whatever. Like I sought out ways to interact with my grief because I knew that grief unchecked is probably not the best thing. Another thing that, why did I feel called to do this versus how other people deal with it? For a year, every single Sunday after I'd go to church and then have lunch at my parents' house, and I was still unmarried at this point, every single Sunday after that was done, I would go drive out to my sister's grave, visit her, leave some flowers, and I knew I was doing it because I was sad and I was grieving. I don't know why that manifested like that, but it's something I felt called to do. I wanted to do. It was a way that I could feel close to her and move on at the same time. I, I would I would encourage people to find whatever that thing is and do it, and don't be ashamed of it, no matter how weird it might seem to somebody else. Just do it. One of the one of the things that I did during that year where I'd visit every week is, when she was in preschool, when she was really young, she would always say, "I want a pet cow to ride from our house to preschool every day." So I went to one of the local like tractor supply places, and for whoever's watching this on video, and I found this little tiny cow,
I
and I
love it.
bought it, and I went and I put it out on her headstone, and it pretty much stayed there like through that whole first year. Nobody ever stole it. It never got knocked over by the lawn guys. Like, it was just a little thing, some obscure thing that had to do with my sister, and for whatever reason I latched onto that and I did it. And it's strange how some of these little things can be so comforting and can mean so much. So I guess, again, to sum all that up, just being proactive during especially that first year when it's so fresh and the emotions are so raw and so new, and because it's an opportunity you'll never get again. That sibling will never pass away again. So while it's fresh, while you have the chance to try to take something so terrible and try to take the lemons that life just handed you, make lemonade, you got to go through that process. Take advantage
Yeah.
of it for sure.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it feels really big, like a Mount Everest to climb for people, right? But I love everything that you shared because you're like, I went to group. I just showed up. I went to her grave. And I love that thanks for sharing the cow with us. I think that's a really important thing to touch on too, because a lot of you guys listening will ask, "Hey, what should I do on my sister's anniversary? What should I do on my brother's birthday?" It's so individualistic. It's so
Hmm.
special for you. So I love what you did, Sydney, because it's what you needed, but it also is something just like you guys know, right? The cow, right?
Yeah,
And it makes it so special. And that's why I always tell people, like, you don't have to start a podcast or write a book or anything. You just need to do what is right for you and just follow that journey. And I love that. Thanks for sharing that with us.
absolutely.
I want people to think about stuff like that. It has to be important to you and a connection to them because that's a part of the healing process. Sydney, anything else you want to share with us before we close out?
Um, the only thing that really comes to mind is I'm so incredibly grateful. Speaking of how do you use your grief constructively, I'm grateful that you started this podcast. I know that everybody that has found it, it's just such an awesome resource. And I just want to encourage everybody to continue along the grief journey, to that I've noticed now that I'm in year 4, the rough edges are a lot smoother. There's this fear that, oh my gosh, as the years go on, I'll forget stuff. And it's true, that's just life. You might forget what somebody sounds like, or you might forget a lot of the details, but the memory's still there. They're still there in your heart. And it does get better. In the immediate aftermath, we can all attest to the fact that it hurts like hell and it is so tough. And you just think, oh my gosh, this is never going to end. I don't want to move on because that's the further away I'll get from my sibling. But as of year 4, I can say that the journey gets better. And it's every once in a while, it's not super frequent. I'll have these moments where it really hits me. But for the most part, it's like just happy memories and happy remembrances. She's not suffering anymore. She sees and experiences reality in such a lucid and enlightened and elevated way that I couldn't even possibly imagine. And I guess just I want to encourage everybody to continue on that grief journey. Always be open for when someone might want to interview you for a podcast or hear your story or whatever. Like, you just never know what those words can mean to somebody. So always just be ready to share.
I love it, Sydney. Totally. That could be a whole episode too, right? You just never know. Like, now that I share so openly, it's really wild, the people that reach out, and I know a lot of people are going to connect with your story too. Sydney, is there anywhere in particular that you would like people to reach out to you if they, again, because there are going to be a lot of people that connect with your story. Are you particularly active on a social platform? We'll drop it in the show notes too.
I am on Facebook. I'm not sure if you'd have to literally type my entire name, but it is Sidney Eugene Savoie II on Facebook. On my email address is sydneysavoie@gmail.com. And then I'm on TikTok. It's cringe because I never really quite nailed down how to make a good or fun TikTok video. I have a few silly ones I made, but I think my username or screen name, whatever you want to call it, is Sidney One Kidney. So Sidney,
Got
the
it.
number one, and then kidney because I'm a kidney donor.
Oh.
It's easy to remember, but any one of those platforms, I love to share. I'm just like you, just like anybody else that's been on your show. We love to share. I learned in my grief journey. I also learned through friends and loved ones growing up who may have had tough situations or been handicapped or whatever. Just ask about it instead of wondering or staring or like, just ask. The more you talk about it and share, the better. That's how I feel.
I agree. I agree. Just talk about it. Just do it. It's like our Nike episode. Just
Yeah.
do it. Just talk about it. I love it. Sydney, thank you so much for sharing your story and Dottie's story with us today. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.